Here to discuss the conclusion of the criminal investigation by our detectives concerning the riot that occurred on August the 17th at the Avon Park juvenile facility. 61 juvenile delinquents have been charged with, at a minimum, rioting and felony criminal mischief. 61 of the 138 that were on the campus. And let me kind of give you an outline of these little darlings here. They represent a total of 919 previous criminal charges. 919 previous criminal charges. If you average that out, that's about 15 criminal charges apiece. And they didn't collect those 15 charges on one event. 71 of those charges were resisting arrest. But let me go over just a few of their 919 previous charges. Previous charges of rioting, robbery, burglary, firing a missile into a vehicle or a residence, resisting arrest, battery on a law enforcement officer, cyber stalking, failure to appear, violation of probation. These 61 aren't misguided children. These 61 are hardcore thugs that were incarcerated by the Department of Juvenile Justice. It's important to understand, as in this day and in the environment, we have this facade being created across the state about how we're too tough on these juveniles, how they just need help and counseling. Let me say something clearly to you that I truly think that the Department of Juvenile Justice needs to understand. And I say this in all sincerity. There is a difference between a child that's made a stupid mistake and violated a law and those under the age of 18 that are hardcore thugs. There's a difference. We share DJJ's ideal position and work toward that of rehabilitating children who have made mistakes, who have made criminal mistakes. We do our best at the county level to divert children from the criminal justice system. We don't ever want them to get tangled up in that system. That's what we do for children that have made mistakes. And some of those mistakes are felony mistakes. But they're children who have done stupid things and made mistakes. What we don't seem to deal with well in the state of Florida, or at least recognize the reason we have to incarcerate these folks, is the hardcore criminal conduct that continues time after time after time. Now, they were in this program, and once again, I want to compliment DJJ. This was a wonderful program to teach them skills, life skills, the ability to go out and have a good job. And I applaud them and G4S for the program. But it appears to us that there were some really hardcore thugs in with just the normal thugs, in with some kids who needed to be in that kind of program, incarcerated, to be helped. And as a result, what occurred was this erupted from a fight into a riot. Now, why did that occur? It occurred because two teams, they call themselves the St. Pete team and the Orlando team, and ironically, after we got into the investigation, very few were from St. Pete or Orlando. That was just their moniker or their team name. That's why we're calling them Team 1 and Team 2. Got into a fight because the St. Pete team would not pay up when they lost the basketball game. It started as a fight, and the fight grew, and there were gang members that were in that Avon Park Academy, and they called their buds, and the next thing you know, we received a frantic 911 call at about 8:34 p.m. saying we have a full-blown riot. And that riot was all over a cup of noodles and a basketball game. What we saw when we arrived and experienced were there were juveniles pulling fire alarms, they were busting windows, they were burning a building, they were throwing things at us from rooftops. They had stolen golf carts and were all piled on it, riding around in circles. Upon arrival of the deputy sheriff, within 20 minutes, we had probably 80 of the 138 under control. And what occurred to get them under control is there was an inner fence and a perimeter and an outer fence, and we called them to the gates, and they came. But there were problems that we saw. There were no tools to deal with the out-of-control juveniles. They owned that facility. They took it away from G4S that night. And they took it away because G4S had no tools to deal with the out-of-control juvenile thug. Their protocols, DJJ's protocols that G4S as a private contractor follows, simply says if you have a problem with a juvenile, you go hands-on. You wrestle them to the ground. You hold them down. But they had no pepper spray. They had no flex cuffs for the potential of a big group of people. They had no infrastructure to immediately bring the initial fight under control and to segregate them from the population that was not in the fight at that particular time. When our deputies arrived and we started bringing the juvenile delinquents out of the riot zone, we took them over to a educational building, auditorium, and we in flex cuffs, and we were putting them in there under very heavy supervision. Well, as we started bringing them out, we got so many of them in there, and I don't know the exact number, but some of them were the troublemakers. And the next thing you know, while we are there with heavy supervision, they became disruptive. We had enough staff there, we immediately pulled them out. So where did we put them? Well, guess where we put them? We put them in one of two buses or 2 or 3 vans that we had brought from the South County Jail down to the academy because they had no way to segregate the troublemakers. So we put the real problem children, oh my gosh, I used that word, on the bus in flex cuffs. We had a meeting with G4S and DJJ that night, and we said, okay, we've got a lot of investigation and a lot of interviews. What are we going to do with the kids? And they said, well, we're going to put them back in the facility. Are you kidding me? It's trashed. The windows are knocked out. There's a fire burning in one of them. They have totally trashed the place. They didn't have a place to put them in the middle of the night. Well, maybe we can take them down to Okeechobee, or maybe we can take some to North Florida. My point is, there was no contingencies for this event. But I submit to you that those contingencies wouldn't have been necessary if those folks had the training and the equipment to be able to stop a fight before it got to the riot level. Our detectives have worked diligently with DJJ and G4S, and I must tell you that DJJ has been totally cooperative. We have filed the affidavits against the 61 with the state attorney's office and recommended that they be charged as adults, not juveniles, because their conduct certainly is adult criminal activity. We anticipate that the state attorney's office will file on most of them as adults. We also noticed that in this investigation there has been a follow-up problem. After keeping, we started out with 64 and ended up with 71 that we kept in the South County jail from the Sunday morning of the riot to the next Friday, when they were able to then disperse them through the criminal justice system. By the way, they're all in custody right now of DJJ. But the very next day, the one whose last name is Graham started into a restricted area at the academy, and one of the G4S stopped him and said, "Hey, this is a restricted area. You know you can't come here." Right in the mouth. Knocked him down. No tools to deal with him. No respect for the G4S folks. And even after spending a week at the South County Jail, even after the riot, you can see they don't care, because they're used to not being dealt with professionally with tools. Now, folks, the night of that event, we went in with our colleagues from other sheriff's offices, Highway Patrol, Game and Fish. We took all 138 into custody and never had to use pepper spray. Never had to use any of our riot tools. Do you know why? Do you know the difference? We had the tools, we had the training, and they knew we would use it if we had to. Just the presence of the tools and the ability to use the tools, and them knowing that's exactly what we would do, reduced a lot of issues. But let's get back to the focus of this. DJJ has a very difficult job every day. On the best day, it's a tough job, because they're truly working very hard to correct this behavior, to return these kids successfully to society, and we agree with that. But when you run across these real tough ones, then you have to deal with them appropriately, and that's what our detectives did by filing these criminal charges. They will remain in DJJ custody. When the state attorney determines their criminal charges, then they will be brought to the courts to answer for those charges. Are there any questions?
Sheriff, would you want to work at that facility under this situation, not having a tool?
No, ma'am. It was a frightening situation, and you could hear it in the G4S folks' voice. They're there to help those kids and do a good job. And when you see what we saw and experience what they experienced, they were terrified with good reason.
How many are under the age of 18?
All of them are under the age of 18 with rare exception. There were a few in the facility that were still under DJJ sanctions that were adults, but most of them are the 15 to 17-year range.
You mentioned that you think that this was a good
I don't know how they got what appears to be a more violent, more dangerous person there with a larger criminal history, because it appeared to be a beautiful program to us. But whether it's a program or not, there has to be discipline. There has to be discipline. And if there's not discipline, you have to have the tools to deal with that. But let me ask you for a second, and I am big on this. Why do we use pepper spray? It reduces injuries to our deputies. It reduces injuries to those we have to arrest. So if we had this pepper spray, rather than this huge amount of damage that occurred at this facility, rather than this riot that broke out, rather than the 5 kids that went to the hospital, and by the way, they injured each other or either cut themselves breaking windows out, a little pepper spray goes a long way. And I'm submitting to you, we'll not know for sure, but I submit to you that the staff, and it was appropriately staffed from everything we see, had they been able to run there with a little pepper spray in the beginning of that fight and spray it down, there would have been no injuries to the juveniles. Pepper spray just stings and burns and causes you to close your eyes, and you've just had enough. And as a result, we wouldn't have had the end result here. Yes, sir.
Are you saying categorically that G4S was not at fault?
I'm saying G4S was not giving the tools and the training by rule. It's not that I think there was a weakness from the people that were on the compound that night. They had the staff on the compound. They had the staff at the facility. I'm suggesting to you that the people that are at fault, or the 61 that we identified, now that we have no illusions, there are others of the 138 that were involved as well. This is all we can identify with a prosecutable case. So don't live under the illusion that the remaining ones were all, you know, just standing around watching the event. Some were, but I'm suggesting to you that this is the people that are responsible. The kids are responsible, not G4S, not DJJ. I'm saying when the kids got out of control, they already knew that their supervisors had no tools. They can count, I think there was like 19, I don't know how many were inside the compound at the time. There's 19 of them, there's 138 of us. Yeah, I think we'll fight tonight.
You mentioned that they weren't prepared and they needed more. Have you made any recommendations to the right people to see that that's changing?
We just have an absolute philosophical disagreement with the Department of Juvenile Justice. They think it's totally inappropriate to use pepper spray. That's what they believe. They call it best practices. I call it getting caught between the world of denial and academia. But I understand academia. I taught at the college level for 23 years, and I understand that that's a very clean environment to teach in. I also understand the reality on the streets when you're dealing with thugs. And I submit to you that because I care and don't want to injure them or get my deputies injured, it's a whole lot easier to give them a little spray than it is to get in a fisticuff with some of these guys. And by the looks of them, and I was there that night, I would love to recruit a high school football team from what I saw. Those are men.
Right after the incident, the TJJ secretary made some comments regarding why this happened, talking about the juveniles being left unattended because staff was taken out of the facility. But at that point, she was still sort of waiting for a briefing from your folks. What's the result of that, and is there any,
Yeah.
is there any truth to that?
Well, I think the information she got was filtered in that there was no staff in control of anything when we arrived. We know that we call staff up, or staff was called up by their folks to see if they were alive and well. We know that initially some staff was unaccounted for. We know that the juveniles took radios and apparently got them either out of buildings or when staff dropped them in the melee and were on the radios. They not only took the compound, they took the radio communications on the compound as well and were screaming gang slogans and words on the radio. I just don't think she understood the magnitude of what occurred there, and it was trying to look out for the safety and security of everyone. And those kids were never left alone. We were there with them, as was the G4S people, but we just think that she didn't understand the magnitude of what happened there that evening. And to suggest that you go down in that situation without the proper equipment and staff and doing it in an orderly fashion is dangerous. But that's the difference in a DJJ executive that has a lot of issues to deal with and those of us who understand riot and crowd control. There's a difference.
Do you think they'll make changes?
The changes, that's up to DJJ. You'll have to ask them. I can tell you that on the best day, the DJJ secretary has a very difficult job. I just think that, in my estimation, we very well could have stopped this at the front end. And at the back end, when we did get it stopped, think about it. Think about it. We didn't have to use force against the first one. Our professional law enforcement officers got there and our colleagues, and we were able to bring them to the gates. And within 20 minutes of arriving, we had 85, 86 of the 138 at the front gate. Yes, ma'am.
The DJJ secretary also mentioned that she didn't think this was as serious as it was portrayed to be, and that those pictures didn't really show the damage. It showed a much bigger picture than what it really was.
I guess you'll have to ask her about that. You know, I've been in this business a long time, and I was there. Right here are these two peekers. I saw a riot. I don't know what she saw 3 days later when she showed up.
Sheriff, I think your exact words, just to follow up, were that she does not believe the sheriff's office should have evacuated her team. So you're saying, just to be clear, that you think she's mistaken?
Well, when her team was on a 911 call saying, send the authorities, we have a full-blown riot, her opinion doesn't matter to us anymore. Because we're in control then. And when we got there and we got in control, within 20 minutes we had 80-something of them under control. And we got all of them under control without any injuries. And then we put them on our buses and took them to our jail because they had no infrastructure. So think about that a second. And interestingly enough, this is really not about DJJ and us. I'm glad to help them. This is about the 61 thugs, plus the ones we weren't able to identify, that created the riot. They are the problem. I'm suggesting that DJJ, by rule, didn't give the tools to try to avoid these problems, but you know what? DJJ comes to work every day like G4S every day, like us every day, to help kids and help wayward kids and help those that are in trouble. And you can be sure of one thing. When you get a kid incarcerated under our system in the state of Florida, it's not just a kid that's made a mistake. He's tough. He's hardcore because we've done all the diversions and the interventions and the counselings in order to try to avoid putting them in a facility. And I think that's the right thing to do. But when it doesn't work, you have to lock them up. And when you lock them up, there should be an expectation by them of discipline while we're trying to put them in programs. And I'm suggesting that I think DJJ does a great job with G4S in their programs. I'm just saying that where our disagreement is, and it's a philosophical disagreement, is that we should control the facility and not let the juvenile delinquents control the facility.
Sheriff, did the lack of surveillance cameras hinder your investigation?
Surveillance cameras certainly would have helped us to identify who was doing what. It's my experience with juvenile delinquents, if they want to fight, all the cameras in the world don't make any difference. That wouldn't have stopped it from occurring, but certainly it would have helped us identify what was occurring, and it would have given the secretary a clear picture of what was happening that night rather than the filtered picture she got when she arrived 3 or 4 days later and they'd already started cleaning up. And once again, I applaud G4S and DJJ. They made those kids come in there and do a lot of the labor, the cleanup, and that's exactly what should have happened.
I'm wondering how you did come up with the cases against these kids. It seems to me like there'd just be a whole lot of finger pointing every which way. How do you get a firm case against these?
Because G4S did a very good job of recognizing who was fighting, who was burning, who was rioting, who was riding golf carts, whose voice was on the radio. They knew these kids because they'd had them in these programs. So when we put all the witnesses together with what our deputies observed and what our deputies could identify with the G4S folks, we were able to put the cases together. And obviously, you know, when backed in a corner, some of these folks talk to us. They understand, ooh, maybe I can talk, and maybe not some of them. Maybe some of them that didn't get charged. Ooh, I can talk, and you know, hey, I was there just watching, but you know, I know who broke into, for example, who broke into medical. For example, one estimate we were given in medical was they probably took or damaged $20,000 worth of medicine. There was a $12,000 copier they told us was destroyed. So there's $32,000 just between lost medicines. And that doesn't mean the kids took all the medicine. In the medicine world, if you go in and bust open the cabinet and throw the packages out on the floor, it's damaged. You can't turn around and use that. So it was a situation that was out of control because of these kids. We've brought charges. The state attorney's office has worked beautifully with us, and at the end of the day, we're going to hold them accountable. The system's going to hold them accountable, and we are going to do what's right to protect the community. After all, 919 times that they were caught for, they've been charged for ravishing the community around the state of Florida. That's not counting all the crime these kids committed that they weren't caught for.
Can any of those kids or already been back at that facility end up at that facility again?
So a lot of them went back to that facility because there's not a lot of place to put them. They have scattered them around. They're all throughout the different DJJ areas. And quite frankly, you know, it is good to save money. I like to save money. But you can't shortchange the entire system. You know, privatization is good. I use some privatization. But you've got to give the private folks the resources to do the job. And it's not that the resources weren't allocated, it's that the rule didn't allow the use. And that's my whole focus here is these kids created the problem. And G4S that night didn't have the tools or the training to attempt to get it under control. All they could do was go in there and hands-on. And when it spreads like that, That's not enough.
Sheriff, did you come up with an estimated cost of the law enforcement response early on? You indicated you might be sending the state a bill.
No, I didn't indicate that I might send them a bill. I will send them a bill. We're in the process of invoicing now. We haven't completed the invoice because my detectives have been working on this for 3 weeks. They tell me the rough estimate is labor cost for that night alone are between $30,000 and $40,000. And that doesn't count the infrastructure cost and the equipment cost, and that doesn't count the other agencies, whether or not the other agencies choose to send an invoice is up to them. And quite frankly, I wouldn't invoice them if they had the tools and the equipment and they were just overrun. Then that kind of stuff happens. But to me, if you're not going to give them the tools on the front end to deal with the issue, and we have to come in and deal with it, then you're going to pay for it on the back end. And once again, it's interesting to me that we had to house 71 kids because there was no place to put them, and we didn't mind. We didn't mind coming down there helping. We didn't mind housing. We volunteered the housing because we wanted to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. These kids were the problem. All of us, to include DJJ and G4S, were just trying to be the solution.